The teacup rattled, just slightly. Lottie noticed her own hand shaking before she noticed anything else. "Careful," said the new footman. He was holding the door. She hadn't asked him to. "I'm always careful. You're gripping that cup like it owes you money." She looked down. He was right. She set it on the tray properly. "You're very free with your opinions," she said, "for a man who's been in this house 4 days. 5. 5, then. I notice things. So do I." "Do you?" "I notice you're standing wrong." He blinked. "I beg your pardon? Footmen don't stand like that." She nodded at him, feet apart, chin up, like you're waiting to be inspected by someone taller than you. "I am waiting to be inspected." "By whom?" "You, apparently." That, at least, made her laugh, just a little. She hadn't meant to. It had started 5 days earlier, when her mother informed her over breakfast that the household required a footman. "We can't afford a footman," Lottie had said. "We can't afford not to have one," her mother replied. "Mr. Grant will be calling again next week. It looks better." Lottie hated when her mother said things like that. "Looks better." As though the whole of their lives had become a performance for a man who wanted her father's remaining acres more than he wanted her. But the footman arrived anyway. Thomas Reed, that was the name he gave. He came with 1 bag, no references beyond a single letter Lottie's mother didn't trouble to question too closely, and hands that were considerably too clean for a man supposedly experienced in service. Lottie noticed that first, before anything else. He served tea properly, that much at least he'd learned quickly. But she caught him more than once staring at the account book on the side table when he thought no one was looking. "Can you read?" she asked him on the 3rd day. "Yes." "Most footmen can't. Most footmen didn't have my education." "And what education was that?" He hesitated just a beat too long. "A thorough one," he said. "My father believed in it." "Your father was a footman too?" "No." "What was he?" Another pause. "Difficult to please." She let it go. She shouldn't have. But something in his face, in that particular unwillingness, felt less like a lie and more like a wound he wasn't ready to touch. On the 5th day, the tea incident happened. Peter, her younger brother, came tearing through the kitchen at full speed, missed the step, and sent the entire tray from Lottie's hands directly toward the good china her mother kept for company. Thomas caught it. All of it. Cups, saucer, teapot, the lot, balanced against his forearm like he'd done it 100 times without spilling a drop. "How did you—" "Quick hands," he said. "That wasn't quick hands. That was—" She stopped, studied him properly for the first time. "That was training." "I trained myself." "To catch teapots?" "To catch things that matter." She didn't have an answer for that. Her mother liked him immediately, which surprised Lottie more than it should have. "He's polite," Mrs. Fenwick said, "doesn't gossip, doesn't drink, and Peter's taken to following him like a puppy. He's teaching Peter to fence with a broom handle in the stable yard." "Is he?" "Very properly. 3rd position, 1st position. He corrected Peter's grip twice." Her eyebrows rose. "A footman who knows fencing positions." "I know." That's a lot to know for a man who empties chamber pots. I know that, too. Neither of them said anything further, but something had settled between them, unspoken, the particular certainty that something about Thomas Reed did not add up, and neither of them was quite ready to ask him directly what the missing sum actually was. Silas Grant called that same week. He always called on Thursdays. He always brought flowers Lottie didn't want and compliments she didn't believe. Miss Fenwick, he bowed over her hand a moment too long. You look well. Thank you, Mr. Grant. I understand you've taken on a new footman. We have. I hope he's proving satisfactory. Very. Something flickered across Silas's face. I only ask because a man was seen on the London road some months ago, resembling a description circulated rather widely at the time, a gentleman of quality, set upon by highwaymen and left for dead, never found, as I understand it. Lottie's stomach went cold, though she couldn't have said why. I'm sure that has nothing to do with our footman, Mr. Grant. I'm sure it doesn't. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Merely idle talk. She did not believe him for one moment. If you already sense Silas knows more than he's letting on, comment "The Road" below and subscribe, because what Thomas is really hiding is bigger than anyone in this house has guessed. Lottie found him in the stable yard 3 evenings later, alone.
Sword, well, broom handle, resting against the fence. He was staring at the sky like it owed him an answer. You look troubled. He startled, actually startled, which she'd never seen from him before. Miss Fenwick, you needn't jump. It's only me. You have a talent for arriving unannounced. You have a talent for looking like you've seen a ghost every time I do. He almost smiled at that. Almost. Mr. Grant asked after you today, she said carefully. After a gentleman on the London road, set upon by highwaymen. Something shifted behind his eyes. Controlled. Deliberate. Did he? He did. And what did you tell him? That it had nothing to do with our footman. Did you believe that? She held his gaze. No. Silence. Long enough that she counted 3 heartbeats before he spoke again. You're very direct. I've had to be. My father died 3 years ago and left considerably more debt than dignity. I don't have the luxury of politely not noticing things, Thomas, if that is even your name. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had changed. Lower, careful. It's the name I'm using. That's not the same as it being your name. No. Then what is? He looked at her a long moment. Not yet, he said. Please, not yet. She wanted to press. She didn't. Something in the plain, unguarded fear behind the request stopped her. All right, she said. Not yet. He began finding small ways to repay that trust, though she didn't understand at the time that repayment was what he was doing. There was the widow Hobbs 2 cottages down, whose roof had been leaking since Michaelmas, and whose son couldn't afford the slate. Thomas fixed it himself, on his half-day, told no one. Lottie only found out because Peter mentioned offhand that Mrs. Hobbs had stopped him in the lane to ask whether the new footman was for hire, because her own roof had never been so sound. There was the boy at the mill, 12 years old, beaten by the miller for a mistake that wasn't his. Thomas walked in, paid the boy's wages for the week out of his own pocket, and told the miller in a voice Lottie hadn't heard him use before that he'd best find gentler hands for the next lad or answer for it. The miller apologized to a footman. Lottie heard about it from 3 separate people before the day was out. "You didn't tell me about the mill," she said that evening. "It wasn't worth telling. A footman making a miller apologize is worth telling. I didn't think of it as remarkable." "That's rather the problem, Thomas. Ordinary men don't do things like that without thinking of them as remarkable." He looked at her a long moment. "I'm not an ordinary man," he said quietly. "I've been trying to tell you that without actually telling you." "I know." "You know?" "I've known for a week. I simply didn't know what to do with knowing." Peter adored him. That much had never been in question. But it was the fencing lessons that told Lottie the most in the end. Not the skill itself, though Thomas moved like a man who'd trained for years, but the patience underneath it. "Again," Thomas said, for the 20th time that afternoon. Peter's broom handle wavered. "I can't get the grip right." "You can. You're gripping it like you're strangling it. Loosen your hand." Peter tried again, missed again. "I'm terrible at this." "You're 14 and you've had this stick for exactly 6 days. Give yourself the same patience you'd give someone else." Peter tried a 3rd time. It landed clean. "I did it." "You did." Peter beamed up at him with the particular unguarded joy of a boy who'd never had an older brother, and Thomas ruffled his hair the way an older brother might, and Lottie, watching from the kitchen window, felt something in her chest twist in a way she didn't yet have a name for. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. No seal Lottie recognized, no return address. Delivered by a rider who didn't dismount, simply pressed it into Thomas's hand at the garden gate and rode off before anyone could ask his business. Thomas read it standing in the yard. His face went the color of old ash. "Thomas?" He didn't answer immediately. "Thomas, what is it?" "They've found the innkeeper," he said, very quietly. "The one who saw the men who attacked me. He's willing to testify, if he lives long enough." "Attacked you?" Lottie repeated. "Then it was you, on the London road." He looked at her. Something in him had finally, visibly given up the pretense. "Yes," he said. "It was me. If you already suspect Thomas is running from something a lot bigger than gossip, comment the letter below and subscribe, because part 3 is where his real name finally starts to surface." He told her the whole of it that evening in the stable yard, with Peter's broom handle still leaning against the fence and no one else close enough to hear. "My name is Frederick," he said. "Frederick Ashby. My father was the Duke of Larkspur. He died 2 years ago, and the title passed to me." Lottie sat down slowly on the mounting block. "A duke?" "For 6 months, yes." "And then?" And then my cousin Edmund decided the title suited him better than it suited me. He told her the rest plainly, no embellishment. The road from London 6 months ago, 2 riders, paid men, not highwaymen at all, despite what the parish had eventually assumed. A blade across his forearm that had come within an inch of something considerably worse. A fall from his horse into a ravine that the men who'd attacked him had every reason to believe was fatal. I woke 3 days later in a shepherd's hut, half dead, no horse, no papers, nothing to prove who I was even if I had wanted to. So you let them believe you hadn't? I let everyone believe it, even my own household, even the Queen, who was my mother's dearest friend and my own godmother, and who I have not written to in 6 months because I did not know which of her own household might carry word back to Edmund. "The Queen," said Lottie faintly. "Yes." "Is your godmother?" "Yes." "And you have been fixing Mrs. Hobbs's roof?" Something almost like a laugh escaped him. It needed fixing. "Frederick!" His name, spoken properly for the first time, seemed to land somewhere he hadn't expected. "Yes?" "Why tell me now?" "Because the innkeeper's testimony means Edmund knows I might be found, and because," he added quieter, "I find I can no longer bear lying to you specifically, whatever else I've managed to lie to everyone else about." Silas Grant called again 3 days later, and this time his purpose was not flowers. He found Lottie in the garden, and there was nothing polite left in his voice at all. "I know who your footman is," he said. Lottie's stomach dropped. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't insult me, Miss Fenwick. I've had a man asking questions in London for a fortnight. Frederick Ashby, presumed dead these 6 months, matches your Thomas Reed rather precisely. Same height, same coloring, a scar on the left forearm, so I am told, that a certain innkeeper is prepared to describe under oath. What do you want, Mr. Grant?" "I want what I've always wanted, your hand and your father's remaining acreage that comes with it. But I find myself considerably more patient about the timeline now that I understand what information I'm sitting on." "You'd blackmail me." "I'd encourage you," Silas said, "to consider very carefully what happens to a duke hiding as a servant once the wrong people learn where to find him, and what happens to the family sheltering him once it becomes known they knew and said nothing." He left without waiting for an answer. He didn't need one yet. He believed he already had all the time in the world. Lottie found Frederick in the library that night, going through her father's old law books by candlelight. "Silas knows," she said. Frederick's head came up sharply. "Knows what precisely?" "Everything. Your name, the scar, the innkeeper. He means to use it, Frederick, either to force my hand in marriage or to sell the knowledge to whoever's paying for it, and I don't know which is worse." Frederick was on his feet immediately. "I'll leave tonight. If I'm gone, there's nothing left for him to threaten you with." "No." Lottie caught his sleeve before she'd fully decided to. "If you run again, you'll spend the rest of your life running, and I am tired, Frederick, of watching good people disappear rather than stand and be counted. There has to be proof somewhere, something your father left, something that outweighs a blackmailer's whisper and an innkeeper's testimony." Frederick went very still. "There may be," he said slowly, My father's solicitor. He held a sealed letter meant only to be opened if my claim to the title was ever seriously disputed. I never thought I'd need it. I assumed if it came to that, I'd simply be dead and it wouldn't matter. Then we need that letter. It's 3 days' ride to London. Then we'd best not waste the daylight we have left today. The solicitor, a careful, elderly man named Mr. Pruitt, required considerably more persuading than either of them expected, given that the man in front of him claimed to be a duke everyone believed dead, dressed in the plain coat of a servant, with mud still on his boots from the road. It was the scar that finally convinced him. "Your father described it to me himself," Pruitt said, examining Frederick's forearm with something close to reverence, "in case you ever needed proof and had nothing else to offer." He produced the sealed letter from an iron box that had clearly not been opened in years. Frederick broke the seal himself, read it twice. His face, when he looked up, had gone entirely still. "What does it say?" Lottie asked.
"Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply, "I feel it my duty to inform you that this man has been living under a false name in this household for weeks, deceiving a respectable family. I am aware of precisely who he is, Mr. Grant," the Queen said, without looking at him directly. "I have known this young man since he was in short coats. What I am considerably more interested in is the nature of your own knowledge of his circumstances and the timing of your sudden concern for this family's respectability." Silas's confidence faltered just slightly. "I only wished to see justice done, Your Majesty." "Did you?" The Queen's gaze finally settled on him fully, and it was not warm. "I am told you approached Miss Fenwick with threats of exposure unless she accepted your suit. I am told this only yesterday by a solicitor who has spent 4 days assembling evidence considerably more damning than anything you might have whispered in a garden." Frederick stepped forward then, the sealed letter in hand. "Your Majesty, before anything further is decided, I must show you what my father left." She read it in silence, every line. When she finished, her expression had hardened into something Lottie recognized instantly, though she'd never seen it on a monarch's face before. The particular fury of someone who has just confirmed a suspicion she'd hoped, against her own better judgment, would prove false. "Edmund Ashby," she said quietly, "has been borrowing against a dukedom he did not yet hold for the better part of 3 years on the certainty that his cousin's death would make the debt irrelevant. Yes, Your Majesty. This is not a matter for a country parlor, Frederick. This is treason against the Crown's own confidence in the peerage, and it will be dealt with as such." She folded the letter with deliberate care. "You will return to London with me today. Your cousin will be arrested before he learns this evidence exists to be used against him. Your Majesty, before I go—" Frederick hesitated, and Lottie watched something in his bearing shift, duke and frightened man both at once. "There is one matter I must settle first." The Queen's eyebrows rose. "And what matter is that?" Frederick turned to Lottie,
crossed the small parlor, knelt in front of a reigning monarch and a furious blackmailer and a stunned household, exactly as any ordinary man might kneel before an ordinary woman he loved. "Charlotte Fenwick," he said, "coming to your house as a footman, with nothing to my name but a false one, and you treated me every single day as though I were worth knowing regardless. I do not know how to properly thank you for that, except to ask you, in front of my own godmother and the whole of your household, whether you would do me the honor of becoming my wife." The Queen, watching, said nothing to stop him, said, in fact, nothing at all, though the corner of her mouth had begun very slightly to soften. Lottie looked at the man kneeling in front of her, the footman who'd caught a falling teapot without spilling a drop, who'd fixed a widow's roof and made a miller apologize and taught her brother patience with a broom handle, who happened, entirely incidental to everything that actually mattered, to also be a duke. "Yes," she said, "though I should warn you, Frederick, I intend to keep the household accounts myself, wherever we end up living." "I would expect nothing less," he said, and the laugh that followed, real and warm, filled the small parlor in a way that made even the Queen, watching from her borrowed chair, look considerably less like a monarch and more like a woman remembering a promise finally properly kept. Edmund Ashby was arrested within the week, the evidence in his father's sealed letter proving considerably more thorough than even Frederick had hoped, and the dukedom of Larkspur returned fully and publicly to its rightful heir before the season was out. Silas Grant found himself rather suddenly without any land to angle for at all, once word spread of precisely whose household he had attempted to blackmail, and he removed himself from the parish entirely before the gossip could properly catch up to him. Mrs. Fenwick told her daughter, the night before the wedding, a story Lottie had never heard before, about a young woman who had once believed marrying below her station meant marrying below her happiness, and had learned slowly, over years of ordinary mornings and small kindnesses, that the two things had nothing at all to do with each other. "Your father was never a duke," she said, smoothing the wedding gown sleeve with careful hands, "but he taught me everything I needed to know about what actually makes a good husband, long before I understood I was learning it." Peter stood as Frederick's own attendant at the ceremony, in a coat considerably finer than any he'd worn before, and spent the whole of the wedding breakfast telling anyone who'd listen that he had in fact personally taught the Duke of Larkspur third position with a broom handle, and had the bruised knuckles to prove it.
It says my father suspected Edmund long before the attack. It says he kept records, dates, sums, correspondence, proving Edmund had been quietly borrowing against the estate's future income for years, certain he'd inherit it outright the moment I was out of the way. It says, if my claim was ever disputed, this evidence was to go directly to the Crown. Then you have him. I have enough to ruin him, Frederick said. Whether that's the same as having him remains to be seen. They returned to Ashdown 4 days later, and word of their absence had, in that time, curdled into exactly the kind of rumor Silas Grant had hoped to profit from.
Mrs. Fenwick met them at the door, pale and furious in equal measure. "Do you have any idea," she said to Lottie, "what has been said in this village while you were gone? Mr. Grant has told half the parish your footman is a fraud playing at nobility, and the other half that you ran off with him to escape arrestable marriage. Both are wrong, and both will be corrected shortly." "Corrected how?" Before either of them could answer, the sound of carriage wheels on gravel cut through the yard. Not Silas Grant's modest gig. Something considerably grander, black and gold, a crest Lottie didn't recognize, catching the grey morning light. Frederick went white. "That's her. That's the Queen's carriage. How does she even know to come here? I sent a rider from London. I had to. If Edmund learns the solicitor's letter exists before the Crown does, he'll destroy every scrap of evidence before anyone can act on it." The carriage stopped. A footman descended, formal and correct, and opened the door. Lottie stood frozen in the doorway, an abandoned tea-tray still somehow in her hands, watching a woman step down whose bearing needed no crown to announce her. Every villager within sight of the road had stopped entirely still. "Your Brace," the Queen said, looking directly past Lottie into the dim hallway where Frederick stood, equally frozen. "Your Majesty," Frederick's voice cracked just slightly on the words. "I can explain. You had better, though I confess, from what your solicitor's rider told me on the road, I already suspect I shall find the explanation rather more dramatic than I would like. If that carriage arriving just made your whole chest tighten, comment 'The Queen' below, and subscribe, because what happens next in that parlor is the confrontation this entire story has been building toward." The parlor had never held so many important people at once, nor so many nervous ones. The Queen sat in the best chair the Fenwick household owned, considerably too fine for the room around her, while Mrs. Fenwick hovered near the door in a state of barely controlled panic, and Peter stared at the whole proceeding with the open-mouthed wonder of a boy who'd been teaching sword positions to an actual duke without knowing it. Silas Grant arrived uninvited within the hour, drawn by the same carriage that had drawn half the village, and made the fatal error of assuming the crisis he'd engineered was still entirely his to control. The Queen attended herself in the end, arriving without the full pomp of her office, dressed instead in something considerably plainer, because she had promised 20 years earlier to watch over a boy she loved as her own, and found, watching him marry a woman who loved him honestly before she ever knew what he was worth, that the promise had been kept in full at last. Frederick and Lottie settled at Larkspur that autumn, and the household staff there learned quickly that their new duchess kept her own accounts, mended her own gowns when she pleased to, and had a habit of humming under her breath when she worked that no one, not even the servants who'd known Frederick since childhood, had ever heard from a duchess before. Village stories about the footman and the tea-tray traveled considerably further than either of them expected, growing more elaborate with each retelling, until neither Lottie nor Frederick could entirely recognize themselves in the versions strangers told at country fairs years later. But the true beginning, Lottie always said, when anyone asked, had never been the carriage, nor the crest, nor even the Queen herself stepping down into a muddy village lane. It had been a rattling teacup and a footman who noticed her hands were shaking before she'd noticed it herself.
If that proposal in front of the Queen hit exactly right, subscribe. New Regency romances every week. Tell me in the comments, did you suspect the footman was really a duke before the letter arrived, or did the Queen's carriage catch you completely off guard?